The sound was louder than the engines. That's the first thing I remember. Not the pain, not the sting on my cheek, but the sharp, echoing crack of a hand hitting skin in a cabin that was supposed to be a sanctuary. It was a sound that didn't belong in first class. It didn't belong anywhere. For a split second, the entire world just stopped. The hum of the Boeing 777 faded into the background. The clinking of crystal glasses in the rows behind me ceased. Even the recycled air seemed to freeze in the vents. I've spent 45 years on this earth, and I've learned that there are different kinds of silences. There's the silence of a boardroom right before a billion-dollar deal is signed. There's the silence of a nursery when a baby finally falls asleep. And then there's this silence, the heavy, suffocating kind that feels like it's pressing down on your chest. The kind that happens when something fundamentally wrong has just taken place. Before I get into how I ended up on the floor of my own airline's flagship jet, holding my crying 3-year-old daughter, while a woman half my size looked down at me with pure, unadulterated loathing. I want to ask you something. Pull up a chair. Or if you're driving, just listen close. Have you ever felt like you were a ghost in a room you paid to be in? Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and realized they didn't see a man, a father, or a human being, but just a problem? If you've been there, or if you just believe that nobody should ever have to feel that way, do me a favor. Drop a comment and let me know where you're joining me from tonight. I need to know who's out there. And if you find value in these stories, in the raw truth of what it's like to navigate this world when the deck feels stacked against you, hit that subscribe button. We're in this together. Now, let's go back. Let's go back to 4 hours before that slap changed everything. I was exhausted. That's the simplest way to put it. I'm the CEO of a major global enterprise. But that day, I wasn't feeling like a titan of industry. I felt like a man who hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night for a week. I had just wrapped up a grueling series of board meetings in Chicago, the kind where you're fighting for every inch, defending your vision against people who see numbers instead of souls. My tie was loosened. My back was aching. And all I wanted was to get home to Atlanta. But I wasn't alone. I had my daughter, Ava, with me. Ava is 3 years old, a curly-haired firecracker who looks exactly like her mother. Her mother, my late wife, Sarah, was the daughter of the man who founded this very airline. When Sarah passed away 2 years ago, a piece of me went with her. All that's left of that light is Ava. She isn't just my daughter, she is the heir to a legacy. She carries the blood of the pioneers who built the wings we were flying on. But to the world, looking at us through the window of a first-class terminal, she was just a little black girl with a tired black father. I don't fly private as much as people think. I like to be on my planes. I like to see how my staff treats the passengers. I like to feel the pulse of the company. Usually, I fly under a middle name, or I have my assistant book it, so I don't pop up on the immediate VIP radar. I want the real experience. And boy, did I get it that day. The boarding process was the first red flag. You know that feeling when you walk into a high-end store and the clerk's eyes follow you. Not with a, "How can I help you?" look, but a, "What are you planning to steal?" look. It started at the gate. I was holding Ava, who was already fussy because she'd missed her nap. We were in the Group 1 line. The flight attendant at the door, a woman named Linda, I'll never forget that name, was smiling at everyone. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Henderson," she'd say to the man in the fleece vest. "Lovely to see you again, Mrs. Gable," she'd chirp to the woman with the designer handbag. Then I stepped up. The smile didn't just fade, it evaporated. It was like someone had flipped a switch. Her face went completely neutral. Stone cold. "Tickets. Please," she said. "No, sir. No welcome." I handed her my phone with the digital boarding passes. She looked at them, then looked at me, then she looked at my sneakers. I was wearing comfortable shoes for the flight. Expensive, but casual. Then she looked at Ava, who was clutching a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. "This is for first class," she said, her voice dropping an octave, as if she were telling me a secret I was too slow to understand. "I know," I said, keeping my voice level. I've practiced that level voice my whole life. It's the voice we use to make sure we aren't perceived as aggressive. "I need to see your ID," she snapped. She hadn't asked for ID from the 5 people in front of me. I felt that familiar heat starting at the back of my neck. It's the black tax. You pay it every day. You pay it in extra time, extra patience, and the extra energy it takes to prove you belong in the space you've already paid for. I pulled out my wallet, showed her my license. She lingered on it, her eyes darting between the photo and my face, looking for a reason to say it was a fake. "Fine," she finally muttered, not even handing the phone back, just letting go of it. So I had to catch it before it hit the floor. "Row 1. Keep the child quiet. This is a quiet cabin." I didn't say anything. I just nodded, shifted Ava to my other hip, and walked down that jet bridge. We settled into 1A and 1B. These are the presidential suites on our new configuration. Fully reclining beds, 32-inch screens, privacy doors. Ava was mesmerized for about 5 minutes before the exhaustion hit her. She started to whimper. It wasn't a loud cry, just that low, rhythmic moan kids make when they're overstimulated and underslept. I was doing everything I could. I was humming her favorite song, a song my wife used to sing to her. I was rocking her. But every time Linda walked by with the pre-departure champagne, she'd linger. She wouldn't ask if I wanted a drink. She'd just stare at Ava with this look of disgust, as if my daughter were a leaking trash bag left on a silk rug. "Sir," Linda said, leaning over the console. She didn't whisper. "I've already had 2 complaints." I looked around. The cabin was half empty. The only other person nearby was an older gentleman in 2F who was wearing noise-canceling headphones and reading the Wall Street Journal. He hadn't even looked up. "Complaints about what, exactly?" I asked. "The doors haven't even closed yet." "The noise," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut. "People pay $10,000 for these seats to avoid the sounds of the nursery. If you can't control her, I'll have to speak to the captain about your suitability for this cabin." Suitability. That word hit me like a physical weight. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. Just a little. Not from fear. I don't fear people like Linda. But from the sheer, exhausting effort of not losing my temper. Because I knew if I raised my voice, if I used even a fraction of the authority I actually held, I'd be the one labeled the problem. I'd be the one escorted off the plane by Port Authority. "She's 3, I said softly. "She's tired. I'm doing my best." "Do better," she hissed. And then she turned on her heel and marched back to the galley. I sat there for a moment, just breathing. The cabin lights dimmed for takeoff, and I watched the rain streaks on the window. I felt like a failure. Not as a CEO, but as a father. I was supposed to be Ava's hero, her protector, and here I was, being spoken to like a delinquent in front of her. Takeoff was rough. The plane bounced through some heavy clouds, and Ava started to scream. It was that high-pitched, ear-piercing wail of a child whose ears won't pop. I felt the sweat building on my forehead. I unbuckled my belt the moment the chime went off, even before the safe-to-move light, and I pulled her into my lap. I started walking the small space of the first-class galley area, bouncing her, whispering in her ear, "It's okay. Baby, Daddy's here. Just breathe. It's okay." The curtains to the galley snapped open. Linda was standing there, her arms crossed, her face twisted into a mask of pure rage. "I told you," she said, her voice trembling with what I realized was genuine, irrational hatred. "I told you to keep her quiet. You are disturbing the peace of this aircraft. She's in pain," I said, trying to push past her to the more open area near the exit door. "Her ears won't pop. I just need a minute to calm her down. You need to sit down and shut her up." Linda replied. She stepped into my personal space. She was close enough that I could smell the coffee on her breath. "You people always think the rules don't apply to you. You get a little bit of money. You get a seat in the front. And you think you own the place." That was it. The mask was off. It wasn't about the noise. It was about the you people. It was about the fact that I was in a space she felt I hadn't earned. "Excuse me," I said. My voice was no longer level. It was deep, vibrating with power. "What did you just say to me?" "You hurt me," she said. She was vibrating. "2, you're a distraction. You're a nuisance. And if you don't sit down right now, I will make sure you never fly this airline again." I almost laughed. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to say, "Lady, I don't just fly this airline. I am the reason you have a paycheck." But I didn't. I wanted to see the full extent of the rot. Ava's crying reached a crescendo. She was terrified by the woman's voice. She reached out her little hand and accidentally brushed against Linda's pristine navy blue vest. Linda recoiled as if she'd been touched by a hot iron. "Don't touch me," she screamed. "She's a baby." I yelled back, "Get out of our way." I tried to move past her, my shoulder brushing hers. It wasn't a shove. But to Linda, it was an excuse. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. Her hand came up in a blur, a flash of white skin and manicured nails, and she swung with everything she had. Crack. The sound echoed through the galley. My head snapped to the side. The sting was immediate, a blooming heat that spread across my cheek. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the sound of Ava's voice. Her crying stopped for one heartbeat of pure, terrified silence, and then she let out a scream like I had never heard before. I stood there, frozen. My hand went to my face. I looked at Linda. She wasn't apologizing. She was standing there, chest heaving, a triumphant, wicked glint in her eyes. "Now," she whispered, her voice trembling with a sick kind of satisfaction. "Sit the hell down before I have the air marshal put you in zip ties." I didn't move. I felt the blood rushing to my face. I looked down at Ava, her face red, her eyes wide with fear. I felt a coldness settle into my bones. I shifted my grip on my daughter, pulling her closer, and I felt the heavy gold ring on my finger, the one engraved with the airline's crest, press against her back. I took a slow, deliberate step forward. My eyes locked on hers, watching as the first tiny flicker of doubt finally began to dance in the back of her gaze. The air in that galley didn't just feel thin, it felt radioactive. You ever have one of those moments where time doesn't just slow down? It actually starts to fold in on itself. 1 second, I was a man trying to soothe his terrified daughter. And the next, I was a statistic. I was the headline I spent my whole life trying to avoid. The sting on my cheek was a physical thing, a sharp, throbbing heat. But the real pain was in the realization that no matter how high I climbed, to some people, I would always be an intruder. I looked at Linda. I didn't see a professional anymore. I saw a woman drowning in her own sense of unearned superiority. She was panting, her chest heaving, and for a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. But instead of apologizing, she doubled down. "Don't you look at me like that," she spat. Her voice was lower now, a serrated whisper. "I know your type. You think because you're sitting in 1A that you can do whatever you want. You think you can intimidate me? I've been flying these routes since before you could afford a bus ticket." I wanted to laugh, but my throat felt like it was full of dry sand. I thought about the 3 decades of grinding. I thought about the nights I spent in a cramped studio apartment, working 2 jobs. I thought about my father-in-law, Arthur, the man who started this airline. Arthur was a man who believed that aviation was the ultimate equalizer. When I married his daughter, Sarah, he told me, "Marcus, the world is going to look at you and see a man who doesn't belong in the cockpit. You have to be so good, so undeniable, that the gravity of your talent pulls the world toward you." And I climbed that corporate ladder until my hands bled. I built the very seat Linda was standing next to. I vetted the training manuals that specifically told her, on page 42, that de-escalation is the primary tool of the cabin crew. But none of that mattered. Right now, I was just a black man in a galley, being told to stay in my lane. "Linda," I said, my voice coming out as a gravelly rasp. I intentionally used her name. I wanted her to know I saw her. "You need to take a breath. You just struck a passenger. You just struck a father holding his child. Do you understand the gravity of what you just did? I defended myself," she hissed, her eyes darting toward the curtain. "You were aggressive. I felt threatened. It's in the manual. I have the right to maintain a safe environment." The threatened card. It's the oldest play in the book. If you can frame a black man's existence as a threat, then any violence against him becomes self-defense. I felt a wave of nausea. Ava was still sobbing against my neck, her little body shaking with such force I thought she might hyperventilate. "You weren't threatened." "Linda," I said, stepping back just an inch. "You were frustrated. You were annoyed that a child was crying. And you were even more annoyed that the child looked like me. Let's be honest for once in your life. If I was a white man in a 3-piece suit named Vanderbilt, would you have put your hands on me?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence was her confession. She turned away to the counter, her hands fumbling with a plastic tray. I stood there, holding my daughter. I started to think about the invisible wall. That's what I call the barrier we hit when we think we've finally made it. You think the first-class ticket is a shield, but the wall is always there, waiting to remind you that to some people, you're just a guest in their world. I remembered a time when Sarah and I were first dating. We went to a high-end charity gala. I was wearing a tuxedo that cost more than my first car. But when I stepped out of the car, the valet didn't ask for my keys. He asked if I was there to deliver the flowers. And here it was again. 30,000 feet in the air. The valet was back. Only this time, she didn't want my keys. She wanted my dignity. I shifted Ava, trying to find a way to soothe her without moving too much. Every time I adjusted my weight, Linda's shoulders would tense up. She was waiting for me to explode. She wanted me to explode. If I started shouting, she'd have her justification. She'd call the captain, and I'd be the one in handcuffs. The black tax is heavy. It's the weight of having to be perfect, just to be considered okay. It's the weight of knowing that your daughter is watching you, learning how the world treats people who look like her. "Daddy, why is that lady mean?" Ava whispered, her voice muffled by my shirt. The question hit me harder than the slap. How do you tell your child that some people are going to hate her, before she even opens her mouth. She's just having a bad day. Honey. I lied. It was a coward's answer. But I wasn't ready to break her heart yet. I looked at the curtain leading back to the cabin. I could hear whispers now. People knew something was happening. I saw a hand reach through the curtain and pull it back. It was the older man from 2F. He looked at me. Then his eyes traveled to the red mark on my face. And then to Linda, who was still aggressively slamming soda cans into a drawer. Our eyes met. He didn't say anything, but there was a look of profound discomfort on his face. He saw the mark. He saw the trembling in Linda's hands. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice steady. Linda jumped, her professional smile snapping back into place. "No problem at all. Mr. Covington," she said, her voice honey-sweet. "Just a minor disagreement about safety protocols. This gentleman was having a bit of trouble following the rules, but we're handling it. Mr. Covington didn't move. He looked at me again. "Are you all right, sir?" I looked at Linda. She was staring at me, a silent threat in her eyes. "Don't you say a word." Her look said, "I'm not all right," I said, my voice finally finding its strength. I wasn't whispering anymore. This woman just slapped me in the face while I was holding my daughter. The silence that followed was different from the first one. This was a heavy, judgmental silence. Linda's face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray. "That's a lie," she shrieked, her composure finally shattering. "He's making it up. He's trying to get a free flight. He's being aggressive." She turned to Mr. Covington, her hands out. "You saw him, didn't you?" He was looming over me. I felt unsafe. Mr. Covington didn't blink. He just looked at the red welt on my cheek. "I've been sitting in 2F for the last hour. Linda." I didn't hear him raise his voice once, but I certainly heard that sound. And I see the mark on his face. He looked at me with a nod. "I have a daughter, too, sir, and if anyone laid a hand on me while I was holding her, I wouldn't be standing here as calmly as you are." Linda was spiraling now. She started pacing the tiny galley. "You're all against me? These people. They come in here and they think they can treat us like servants. They think they're better than us. Linda, stop," a new voice said. I looked up. A younger flight attendant had appeared from the mid-cabin. She looked horrified. She had clearly heard the shouting. She looked at Linda, then at me, then at the mark on my face. She gasped. "Linda, what did you do?" she whispered. "I didn't do anything." Linda screamed. "He's a liar." She was losing it. She grabbed a carafe of coffee from the warmer. For a second, I thought she was going to throw it. I stepped back, shielding Ava with my entire body. I looked at the younger attendant. "Call the captain," I said. It wasn't a request. I can't just call the captain," the girl stammered. "Tell the captain that Marcus Sterling is in the galley," I said, my voice dropping to a level that made the girl flinch. "Tell him there has been a physical assault on a passenger, and tell him that if he doesn't get back here in 30 seconds, this airline is going to have a lot more to worry about than a crying baby." The girl's eyes went wide. She looked like she'd just seen a ghost. "Mr. Sterling," she whispered. Linda froze. The coffee carafe rattled in her hand. "Who?" she asked, her voice small and brittle. "Who is he?" The younger girl didn't answer. She just turned and bolted toward the cockpit. I stood my ground. I felt a coldness settle into my bones, and I realized my own hand was reaching for the wall of the galley to steady myself as the floor seemed to tilt beneath me. The cold vibration of the galley wall felt like it was trying to tell me something, a mechanical pulse humming through my fingertips. I could feel the microscopic tremors of the aircraft, millions of parts working in perfect harmony. And yet, in this tiny square of the world, everything was falling apart. I leaned my weight against that panel, my knuckles white. My cheek wasn't just stinging anymore. It was radiating a deep, pulsing heat. It was the fire of every time I'd been told to wait, to be quiet, to move to the back, to prove I belonged. Linda was still there, but she looked like a statue made of salt. Her eyes were now wide and glassy. You could see the terrible, slow-motion realization that the man she had just struck wasn't a problem to be solved, but the person who owned the solution. I didn't say anything to her. I couldn't. I've spent my entire career as a man of restraint. But standing there, with my daughter's tears soaking into the shoulder of my shirt, the architect was gone. I was just a man, a hurt, tired, furious man who had just been reminded that, in certain eyes, my humanity was optional. I looked down at Ava. She was doing that silent, hitching sob that breaks your heart worse than the loud noise. That's the emotional memory that's going to haunt me, not the hit. But the way my child looked at me afterward, she looked at me like I was breakable. The black tax I talked about earlier, this was the interest payment. I've sat in rooms with heads of state, but in this galley, I was back in that third-grade classroom where the teacher assumed I'd stolen the lunch money. It's a recurring dream that you can't wake up from. Then, the cockpit door clicked. It's a heavy, armored sound. Captain Miller stepped out. I knew Jim Miller. He's a veteran, a guy who's been with the company for 30 years. He was one of the first pilots my father-in-law hired. He's also a man who has had dinner at my house. He's seen Ava in her crib. The younger flight attendant was right behind him, her face pale. Jim's eyes scanned the room. He saw Linda standing there like a ghost. He saw Mr. Covington in the aisle, and then he saw me. His gaze landed on the red welt on my face. The recognition was instant. It wasn't just the CEO. It was Marcus. Marcus. Jim's voice was low. What is going on back here? Before I could answer, Linda finally found her voice, but it was the high-pitched, desperate babble of a person who realizes the ground has vanished. Captain, he was being unruly, she stammered. He wouldn't sit down. The child was screaming, and he moved toward me. I felt threatened. Captain, I was just following the safety protocols for an aggressive passenger. She was pointing at me, her finger trembling. She didn't realize that Jim wasn't looking at me like a passenger. He was looking at me like a brother. Jim didn't even look at her. He took 2 steps toward me. Marcus, are you okay? He asked softly. He looked at Ava. Is she okay? I took a deep breath. She's terrified. Jim, I said. My voice was steady, but it was the kind of steady that feels like a frozen lake, smooth on top, but with a dangerous depth underneath. And I'm something else entirely. Captain, Linda cried out. Do you know this man? He was violating FAA. Shut up. Linda, Jim said. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. He finally turned to look at her. Do I know this man? Jim repeated, his voice dripping with cold irony. Linda, this is Marcus Sterling. He is the chairman and CEO of this airline. And the screaming child you're referring to is the granddaughter of Arthur Vance, the man whose name is on the tail of this aircraft. The silence that followed was absolute. Linda's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked like she was choking on the very air she was breathing. Her eyes went to me, then to Ava, then back to the captain. The realization didn't just hit her, it crushed her. The nuisance in 1A was the man who held her entire world in his hands. But here's the thing. I didn't feel a sense of triumph. I felt a profound sense of sadness, because I knew that if I hadn't been Marcus Sterling, if I had just been Marcus the accountant, Jim wouldn't have stepped out of that cockpit to save me. I would have been met at the gate by police. The only reason I was getting justice was because I had the right title. And that is a bitter pill to swallow, when you realize that your dignity is tied to your bank account rather than your humanity. I didn't know, Linda whispered. I thought. He didn't look like what? Linda, I asked. I stepped forward. He didn't look like he belonged here. He didn't look like someone you had to treat with basic human decency. I looked at the red liquid on the floor, the spilled coffee, and it looked like a wound. You didn't see a person, I continued. You saw a category. You saw a stereotype. You decided that because of the way I look, I was a safe place to dump that trash. I felt the transformation happening inside me. The victim was being replaced by the leader. I looked at Jim. Jim, I need you to understand something. This isn't about me. She did this in front of my daughter. She made my child believe that the world is a place where you get hit for trying to sleep. She made my child afraid of the people who are supposed to keep us safe. Jim nodded. I understand. Marcus, I'm so sorry. Don't apologize for her. I interrupted. She needs to handle her own weight. I turned my attention back to Linda. She was crying now. But they were the tears of someone who was sorry they'd been caught. Mr. Sterling, she pleaded. Please. I've been with this airline for 15 years. I have a mortgage. Stop, I said. You had a mortgage 10 minutes ago. 2. But that didn't stop you from putting your hands on a passenger. I looked at her uniform. It was supposed to represent service. On her, it looked like a lie. You're relieved of duty. Linda, Jim said, go to the crew rest area. Now, I'll be filing a full report the moment we touch down. Linda looked at him, then at me, one last time. She turned and walked toward the back of the plane. The younger flight attendant, Sarah, stepped forward with a wet towel and a small bag of ice. Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice trembling. Please, let me help. I looked at her. I saw the genuine fear in her eyes, not fear of me, but fear of the situation. I took the ice from her. Thank you, Sarah, I said. I pressed the ice to my cheek. The cold was a shock. I looked around the galley. Mr. Covington was still there, watching me with a quiet nod. Jim was talking into his headset. Everything was returning to a version of normal, but it was a broken normal. I looked at my daughter. She was staring at the ice pack on my face. I realized that I couldn't just sit back down and pretend the flight was over. I felt a shift in my gut. I wasn't just a passenger anymore. I was the person who had to fix the foundation. I handed the ice pack back to the younger flight attendant and straightened my shirt. I looked at Jim. Jim, I'm going to need the manifest for every crew member on this flight. And I want a private channel to the board of directors the moment we're in range. Jim didn't ask why. He just nodded. You got it. Marcus? I turned away from the galley and started walking back toward my seat. But I didn't sit down. I stood in the middle of the first-class cabin, my face exposed, the red mark a badge of a battle that was just beginning. I looked at the other passengers. I realized that this story wasn't going to end with a landing. It was going to end with a transformation. I reached out and touched the headrest of 1A, my fingers tracing the embroidered logo of the airline. I felt the hum of the plane beneath my palm. And for the first time since boarding, I didn't feel like a guest. I felt like the owner And I knew that by the time this plane touched the ground, nothing would ever be the same again. I sat down next to my daughter, pulled her into my lap, and let her feel the steady, rhythmic beat of my heart, while I stared straight ahead at the dark clouds gathering on the horizon. The dark clouds I'd been staring at didn't break as we began our final descent. They just grew thicker, a bruised purple curtain that swallowed the wings of the plane whole. I felt the landing gear drop, a heavy, mechanical thud that reverberated through the soles of my shoes. Ava was still tucked into my side, her breathing finally rhythmic, her small hand clutching the collar of my shirt. She had found her peace, but mine was still somewhere back in that galley, standing there in the quiet of the first-class cabin as the Atlanta skyline began to pierce through the gray mist. I didn't feel cold. I felt a strange, simmering heat, a clarity that comes when you realize that your purpose has just shifted. I wasn't just here for the quarterly earnings. I was here to protect the soul of this company. If you're still with me, if you've walked this journey with me, I want you to think about the last time you saw someone being treated like they didn't matter. Did you speak up? We're all captains of our own lives. Before I tell you how this ends, make sure you've shared this story. We need to remind the world that success doesn't insulate you from struggle. The wheels hit the tarmac with a puff of blue smoke. Ava blinked, her eyes searching mine. I gave her the best smile I could muster. "We're home, baby," I whispered, as we taxied toward the gate. The atmosphere on the plane was unnervingly still. The passengers in first class were looking at me with a mix of awe and shame. They knew they had watched a man be humiliated. Jim, the captain, came over the intercom. His voice was somber. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you remain seated until the aircraft has come to a complete stop. We have a matter of official business to attend to." When the jet bridge finally groaned into place, I didn't move. I watched as 4 men in dark suits and 2 members of the airport police stepped onto the plane. They weren't there for me. They were there for the report. I saw Linda one last time. She was being escorted out. She kept her head down. As she walked by row 1, she paused for the briefest of seconds, but she didn't say anything. She just looked at the empty space where she had once stood with so much unearned authority, and then she was gone. I stood up, adjusting Ava's jacket. My legal counsel, David, met me at the door. He saw the bruise on my face, and his jaw set in a hard line. "Marcus," he said, "the board is already convening. We have the statements from the passengers. This is an open and shut case of assault. It's more than that." "David," I said, "it's a failure of culture. We forgot to teach them how to see people." We walked through the terminal. I felt the weight of every gaze. I realized that for every Linda out there were 1,000 people just trying to do their jobs with grace. I took Ava to the car, where my sister was waiting. I watched the car pull away, and then I turned back toward the airport headquarters. The meeting wasn't long. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table. "I don't want to talk about the lawsuit," I told them. "I want to talk about the fact that a woman felt safe enough in her prejudice to strike a man holding a child. I want to talk about the invisible wall that we've allowed to stay standing." That afternoon, I signed an executive order that changed the way we hire and train. We called it the Humanity Protocol. It made it clear that bias was a safety risk. It was a fire in the cabin that needed to be extinguished before the plane ever left the ground. But as I sat in my office late that night, I realized the biggest lesson wasn't for the company. It was for me. I had thought that if I was just successful enough, the world would stop seeing the skin and start seeing the soul. But you can't hide your way into respect. I picked up my phone. The video from the flight had already leaked. The world was talking. I realized that my private pain had become a public bridge. So, here's the takeaway. Don't ever let someone else's smallness make you feel like you don't belong in a big room. Rip up the script that says you're a nuisance. Write your own. I'm Marcus Sterling. I'm a father. I'm a CEO. And I'm a man who's going to make sure that the next time you fly, the air is a little bit clearer for everyone. Thank you for listening. Truly, if this story touched you, let me know in the comments. Join the family, subscribe, and stay tuned. Because the journey doesn't end when we land. It only begins when we decide where we're going next. I walked out into the cool night air, looked up at the stars, and started the long, quiet walk toward a home that finally felt like it belonged to me. You know, they say that when you reach the top of the mountain, the air is supposed to be clearer. But let me tell you something. The higher you go, the more people try to tell you how to breathe. After that flight, after the bruise on my face faded and the video went viral, I found myself in a different kind of cockpit. This one didn't have wings. It had glass walls and a mahogany table. 12 people looked at me like I was a liability instead of their leader. I'm Marcus Sterling. I'm the CEO who got slapped while holding his daughter. But what the news cameras didn't show you was the second slap. The one that happens in the shadows, where people try to convince you that your dignity has a price tag. Have you ever had to stand in a room full of people and explain why a policy change isn't enough? Drop a comment below. I walked into the board meeting at 8:00 a.m. sharp. Usually, these meetings start with small talk. But that morning, the silence was heavy. There was one man, Harold. He'd been on the board since before I was born. To Harold, an airline was a machine. Marcus, Harold started. He didn't look at the bruise on my cheek. The stock dropped 2 points this morning. The humanity protocol you've proposed. It's expensive. It's a lot of overhead for an isolated incident. An isolated incident. I felt that familiar heat. Harold, I said, do you know what my daughter asked me last night? She asked me if we had to hide the next time we went on a plane. Is that overhead for you? We all feel for the girl. Marcus, another board member, chimed in. But we have a fiduciary duty. If we settle quietly, this goes away in a week. Settle quietly. That's the phrase they use when they want to buy your silence. They wanted to write a check to Linda, and probably one for me, too. I stood up and looked out at the tarmac. I remember when Arthur Vance started this company, I said. He used to tell me that the wings of a plane don't care who's sitting in the seat. Gravity treats us all the same. I turned back to the room. Harold, you say this is an isolated incident. I say it's a symptom of a cancer we've ignored. If you want to settle quietly, you can do it without me. Because if this protocol doesn't pass today, all of it, then you can have my resignation on this table by noon. The air left the room. They didn't think I'd do it. They thought the black CEO would be too grateful for his seat to risk losing it. But they forgot that I didn't get this seat by playing their game. I got it by building my own. You'd walk away from the legacy Arthur left you. Harold asked. I'm trying to save the legacy. I replied. Arthur built this airline on the idea of flight as a gift. What happened on that plane wasn't a gift. It was a curse. The vote passed, 10-2, but the victory felt hollow. I walked out and found a man waiting for me, Linda's lawyer. Mr. Sterling, he said, my client is prepared to sign an NDA. We're willing to walk away for a very reasonable sum, considering the hostile work environment my client was subjected to. I looked at him. I felt a wave of pity for him, and for Linda. They were so caught up in the transaction of life that they had forgotten the cost of their souls. Get out, I said. Tell your client that there will be no settlement. We are going to trial, and every second of that flight's footage is going to be played in front of a jury." The lawyer scurried out, and I was finally alone. I sat down and pulled out a photo of my late wife. "Sarah," I thought about my sister's message. "Ava is asking for you. She won't go near her toy planes today." That hurt more than any board member's words. I realized that the invisible wall isn't just in the sky. It's in the home. It's in the way trauma trickles down. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. As I walked through the lobby, the staff looked at me with a quiet, fierce pride. One of the security guards gave me a slow, deliberate nod. "Good work today, Mr. Sterling," he said. "We're just getting started, Otis," I replied. I walked out into the humid Atlanta afternoon, knowing the road ahead was going to be long. But for the first time, I felt like the wings were actually lifting us up. 6 months. That's how long it took for the world to stop talking about the slap and start talking about the change. Linda had been held accountable by the law. The humanity protocol was being taught in every training center. We were becoming the gold standard. But for all the corporate success, there was one area where I was still failing. Ava wouldn't fly. Every time I mentioned a trip, she'd start to shake. The mean lady lives there. She'd say, I was the man who kept the world moving. Yet I couldn't move my own daughter past a single moment of trauma. So, I decided to do something radical. I wanted to show her that the sky didn't belong to the mean lady. It belonged to her. If you're a parent, you know the feeling. You'd move mountains to take away a single bad memory. This story is for everyone who has ever had to help someone they love heal from a wound that doesn't show up on an X-ray. I took Ava down to a small, private airfield. I'd arranged for a small, 4-seater Cessna, the kind Arthur used to fly. No first-class cabins, no uniforms, just a pilot, a father, and a daughter. The pilot was Elena. She was part of our new scholarship program. She had a kind face. When we pulled up to the hangar, Ava gripped my hand. No, Daddy. The mean lady is there. I knelt down. Ava, look at me. This is a special plane. It carries dreams. Elena knelt down next to us and held out a small, silver pin, the wings of a pilot. Hi, Ava, Elena said. I heard you're a very brave girl. I need a co-pilot today. Ava looked at the pin. Curiosity was starting to win. No mean lady, Ava whispered. No mean lady. Elena promised. It took 40 minutes just to get her into the seat. I sat in the back, watching her. When the engine started, Ava flinched. I reached forward and squeezed her shoulder. I'm right here, baby. As the wheels left the ground, Ava let out a tiny gasp. We're flying, Daddy. We spent an hour in the air. We watched the sky turn into a canvas of gold. Elena talked to her about how the wings worked. Then, something happened that I'll never forget. A large commercial jet, one of ours, crossed our path a few miles away. Usually, this would send Ava into a tailspin. But this time, she just watched it. Is that a good plane? Daddy, she asked. It is now, Ava, I said. When we landed, Ava didn't want to get out. She wanted to stay and help Elena park the wings. I stood on the tarmac, and I felt a weight lift off my chest. The invisible wall had been dismantled. A few days later, I was back at the office, sitting in a town hall meeting with our flight attendants. We were discussing the results of the humanity protocol. Data doesn't tell the whole story. A flight attendant from the London base stood up. Mr. Sterling, she said, I wanted to tell you about a flight I had last week. We had a nervous passenger. In the old days, we might have ignored him, but I spent 10 minutes just sitting with him, listening to his story. "Thank you for giving us our humanity back." The room erupted in applause. I looked at the screens, at the faces of my employees, and I realized that the black tax was finally being abolished, one conversation at a time. As the meeting ended, I walked out to the observation deck. I thought about Arthur and Sarah. I thought about the legacy I was leaving for Ava. The world is always going to have Lindas, but those people don't own the sky. I pulled out my phone and called home. My sister answered. "Ava is in the backyard. Marcus. She's running around with her arms out wide. She told me she's going to be a kind captain one day." I hung up the phone and smiled. The silence was broken, and the sky finally belonged to her. Don't wait for permission to be great. You were born for the sky. If someone tries to slap the dream out of your hand, you just hold on tighter. I'm Marcus Sterling. I'll see you on the next journey. Don't forget to subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear that they belong. We're all in this together. Peace and love.